Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e. This is a player guide for the fairy race in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. This video is designed for players so that they can find out how to use the fairy race in your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game and how to exploit it using its mechanics. The Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy race gets a couple of different increases to their ability scores. You can increase one ability score by 2 and increase a different score by 1, or if you would prefer, you can increase 3 different scores by 1. This gives you ultimate flexibility for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, providing a huge range of options to exploit as a flying race. The fairy race can have pretty much any class with no perceived penalties or disadvantages now. The fairy character can speak, read and write Common and one other language in your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game. The Dungeon Master still needs to sign off on what second language you would take, but there's still the opportunity to tailor your choice to frequently used languages such as Goblin, Orc, Dwarven and Elven. The fairy race has a number of different characteristics. This allows players to make a fairy look like just about anything in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. They provide you with a chart offering a few different ideas. The fairy's appearance varies widely in Dungeons & Dragons lore, but also in folklore, so this makes sense. Players can now let their imagination go wild. Your wings are like those of a bird, you have shimmering multicolored skin, you have exceptionally large ears. A glittering mist surrounds you. You have a small spectral horn on your forehead like a little unicorn horn. Your legs look like an insect and you smell like fresh brownies. You have a noticeable harmless chill surrounding you. The creature type for the fairy is that of the Fae. This means that some spells will not work on a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy as they target humanoids such as Hold Person, Dominate Person and Charm Person. A Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy will still be affected by spells like Hallow, Forbiddance and Temple of the Gods, but they are really going to come up in your game, so I wouldn't worry about them. The size of your Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy is small. This means when using weapons with the heavy weapon property while playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e, your fairy will have disadvantage on attack rolls. Small fairies will not be able to grapple or shove creatures of large size or greater, but you will be able to at least resist those grapples and shoves. A Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy can ride a small mount, but it's kind of pointless, unless of course the mount is faster than the fairy, or you want to ignore the benefits of flying as a fairy. Squeezing through smaller spaces than a medium-sized creature is not really going to be the possibility, because medium and small creatures kind of operate exactly the same way. You have to be tiny size to really have any sort of significant impact. But what you will be able to do as a small creature is you will be able to move through the same area or space as a large hostile creature rather than a huge size creature. Tiny playable races have been easily exploited in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, because you can pretty much get into any location other creatures can't get into. And this is still possible by casting the Enlarge Reduce spell on yourself while you are small. Since you are a small creature, you can do this. This will allow you to get into places like through possibly a keyhole if it's very large, under a door, through a pipe, down a chimney. It is still possible to shrink down to tiny size and fly inside a monster's ears, nostrils or mouth, and enlarge yourself as a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy, resulting in the monster's head exploding. Now, the problem with this is you're probably going to have to cast the Enlarge Reduce spell twice rather than once, and all of this is going to be at Dungeon Master discretion. Fairy folklore suggests that the size of a fairy varies widely from about 5 feet right down to very, very small. The walking speed of a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy is 30 feet, which seems extremely generous considering that the other races have movement restrictions of about 25 feet. All fairies have normal vision in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, so the Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy doesn't have dark vision, true sight, blind sight. This seems kind of strange, so considering so many races have dark vision. The fairy doesn't even have advantage on perception checks like the Haragon or the Rabbit Folk. The Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy gets fairy magic. That means you get Druid Craft, a cantrip. It's very hard to use effectively, but it does fit the theme of the Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy. The Fairy Fire spell is gained at level 3 for a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy, which is a bit late for a bard or a druid, but the other classes don't even get this spell, so it can be very useful. Fairy Fire is vital for dealing with invisible creatures and gives the party members the benefit of advantage on attack rolls that target a highlighted monster. The Enlarge Reduce spell is gained at level 5 and is a bit late for a wizard, but the other classes don't get this spell, and it's going to be useful inside and outside of combat. You can only use Fairy Fire and the Enlarge Reduce spell once, and then you have to take a long rest without you having to use any kind of spell slots. If you have a spell slot at the correct level, you can use these spells to cast them from those, and you don't have to prepare them, which is actually very, very good. Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma are your spell casting abilities, which is incredibly flexible. This basically means you can now select any spell casting class with no drawback, such as a wizard, a sorcerer, a bard, cleric, druid, or artificer, and multiclassing will be even easier. The Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy has wings and a fly speed equal to its walking speed, which is 30 feet. You can't fly if you are wearing medium or heavy armor, same as the Aarakocra. This means a fly speed can be increased for a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy race, with the monk or barbarian class, and certainly with the haste spell. Because the Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy can't hover, that means anything that reduces your speed to 0 will make you fall. Dexterity-based characters are probably going to benefit from the Dungeons & Dragons fairy the most because you're using ranged attacks and it's built around the sort of thing. The Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy can deal with exploration and hazardous environments much more easily than the other races, and this is why. You can cross a pit by flying over it or a chasm. You can reach multi-leveled areas without having to climb. Now, if you're dealing with traps, so trap pressure plates and tripwires are usually at floor or knee level. So that means a fairy can fly over them without triggering them. But it doesn't help the rest of the party, so try not to put your fairy in the front line. The fairy for Dungeons & Dragons 5e is not going to be carrying another person's character because it's pretty obvious from the armor restrictions that the race is not intended to transport the party or other player characters. What a Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy can still do is carry a rope across a wide gap or up a sheer surface and tie off that rope so the party can use it to get across that gap or up that sheer surface or cliff face. Flying will result in fairies staying out of melee range, which is very good, so they can rely on their ranged attacks and take less damage. The most dangerous aspect of the Dungeons & Dragons 5e fairy is that they can eventually become untouchable, as they can cast invisibility probably if you're going to be using a spellcaster, which you probably will, or greater invisibility, and then essentially you're airborne and nobody's going to even know where you are. You won't leave footprints, and possibly you won't make that much noise either. What you need to bear in mind is, as a fairy while you're flying, you become the prime target, and as all of your enemies might have ranged attacks are going to fire them all at you, so try to use cover while you're flying. Now, if you found this video useful and helpful in some way, great. I have a live stream that goes into far more detail on the playable race, the Fairy. Now, if you want to check that out, you can. Otherwise, if you like my stuff and you want to see other stuff, I have videos for players and Dungeon Masters covering every aspect of Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons 5e. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos. Make sure to do the usual YouTube things like share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live, and I go live every week, and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.